It is a great schools to welcome so many familiar faces and new faces to the OU Universal Center. My name is Rabbi Sam Shor. I'm the program director here at the OU Universal Center. And over the past number of years, the Moshe Kuhr has really been a real nechus for the English-speaking community to access the Torah of the Maharal Zatzal. And Dr. Kuhr has published numerous svarim of the Maharal's Torah, and tonight is yet another opportunity for us to learn not only about the Maharal, but also to learn from the insights of Dr. Kuhr himself, but also two of our other beloved teachers here in the Anglo-Torah world in Yerushalayim Kodesh. The first speaker this evening is someone that really needs no special introduction, particularly to those of us here at the Universal Center, because we are blessed to have Maria Rabbeinu, Rabbi Yitzhak Berdowitz, with us on a regular basis here at the Universal Center. And it's a great excuse for me to introduce Maria Rabbeinu, Rabbi Yitzhak Berdowitz.
Hi everybody, this is my third time this week here, so I consider the OU Center virtual home, away from home, and it's a very happy occasion for me. I'm really such a kavod and such a simcha to celebrate yet another sefer of machshava and Torah from Dr. Kuhr, along with his son Edom is a co-author too, right? Is that? Yeah. And with Phyllis being the Ager Connecto, as she always is. And I hope that, number one, this is going to be of great benefit to Klal Yisrael, that we'll learn the deep thought of the Maharal, and it should also be a great zechus for you and your whole family to be blessed with good health and all of the brachos, as is befitting someone that is Marvitz Torah and sends words of Torah out into the world. I want to really share with you two thoughts. One is a thought about our Mechaber, and the other is a little bit about the Maharal, so they're kind of both together. First, in this parsha, we read about Parshas Balak, and the Torah tells us that Balak, the king of Moab, is very afraid of the Jewish people, and he hires a sorcerer, Bilam, to curse the Jewish people. The question that many Meforshim ask is the following: what on earth is Balak afraid of? In the book of Devarim, we read that the Jewish people were commanded. They asked Moab for food and water. The Moabites denied it. They were commanded, do not wage war with Moab. The Moabites are the descendants of Lot. The land of Moab was given to Lot in the narrative of Abraham. Don't touch it. That's why we had to circumvent it. So if that's the case, Balak has nothing to be afraid of. The Jewish people are not allowed to even enter the land of Moab without permission. They were not given permission. End of story. Now, one answer might be that even though the Jewish people were commanded not to wage war with Moab, did Balak necessarily know that at the time? That's one possibility. But the great Hasidic Rebbe, the Shem Shmuel, the son of the Avnei Nezer, the son of the Sachatchaver, grandson of Kutzker Rebbe, offers a beautiful, beautiful explanation that I think is highly relevant to the occasion tonight. He says, Balak was not afraid of the Jewish people going through his land and conquering his nation. He knew that wasn't going to happen. He was afraid of their going to Eretz Yisrael. By all means, he wanted to prevent them from going to Eretz Yisrael. Why is that so? Because God's relationship to the Jewish people in the Midbar is very different than his relationship to us once we come to Eretz Yisrael. The Midbar is a spiritual cocoon. The Midbar is an artificial environment in which God is open and revealed and obvious. The man comes from heaven. The water travels in the merit of Miriam, and even though we lost it when Miriam died, we regained it. The clouds of glory. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence is open and obvious without any safek. All of their material needs are taken care of. So even though we managed to complain even in that environment, but Lamaisa, what is there to do other than learn Torah, be davok in Hashem, do mitzvahs? Now that type of open relationship with God has its costs. When the presence of God is so palpable, every misstep can have drastic consequences. You know, you do an Aveira, thousands of people can die. That doesn't happen in the world of concealment, the world of Hester, where you apparently get away with things for a while. Once we come to Eretz Yisrael, life is going to be different. We're not going to have the man. We're going to have to grow our grain in fields. We're not going to have automatic traveling wells. We're going to have to dig our wells and rely on the rains from heaven. We don't have clouds of glory. We have to have an army. We have to dig ditches, build cities, have lawyers, doctors, accountants, business people. Balak doesn't want that to happen. Why? Because as long as the Jewish people are living in a cocoon that is divorced from reality, and they're a holy nation, that is not a reproach, that is not a musar to the Balaks of the world. They basically look at the Jewish people and say, they're not living in a real world. In their artificial world, sure, they can serve God, sure, they can be moral, sure, they can be good, but that's no message to me. I got a real world to run. I got a society to run. I need diplomacy, politics. Meaning, let the Jews stay in their spiritual cocoon, because then they have no message for the rest of humanity. Once they come to Eretz Yisrael, and at least in an ideal sense, we didn't always live up to our potential, but in an ideal sense, they're involved in the details of a society. An army, a society, a political structure, and they still show that you live by God's law. That's a reproach to all the other cultures that lost their excuse. So Bilam says, not Bilam, Balak says, let the Jews stay in the desert, but don't let them establish a real world society based on Torah, because then we all look bad. This is the Chiddush of the Shem Yishmael. And what you see from this Chiddush is that in a very real sense, the purpose of Torah, this is why the Torah is called Torah's Chaim, a Torah of life. The Torah is supposed to teach us how to deal with the real world and all of its different implications. How to create businesses, structures, doctors, lawyers, whatever it would be. Meaning, you don't serve God by withdrawing from the world. You don't serve God by rejecting the world. You serve God by embracing the world and bringing the Torah into that world. This was the Shita that later became identified as Torah and Derech Eretz by Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. People think, oh, Torah and Derech Eretz just means Rav Hirsch was in favor of college. Well, that happened to be true in the 19th century. It's lav dafka, he would have been in favor of college today. In the 19th century, the German universities, there was modesty, there was tzniut, even among the Goyim. The big nisayon was the intellectual nisayon of maybe my kid will read Spinoza. Today, maybe I wouldn't say going a little too far. Today it's almost halvai my kid in college would read Spinoza. The problem today is drugs and sex and all sorts of other stuff. So to say that Rav Hirsch would be in favor of the secular university is a big jump. It's lav dafka. But the larger idea of Torah and Derech Eretz is Rav Hirsch's conviction that we have to find a way to bring Torah into every single activity of human endeavor. Not to create the idea that you only serve God in the shul or in the kollel or in the shir, but even engagement in the world becomes avodat Hashem. In fact, it was fascinating. The first Rav HaRashi, Ashkenazi Rav HaRashi of Medidat Yisrael was not, of course, Rav Kook, who died in the 30s, but it was Rav Yitzchak Herzog, the grandfather of and namesake of the president of Israel. And Rav Herzog was a brilliant, brilliant person who not only was a master of Torah, but a master of many, many disciplines as well. And one of his interesting projects, which never got fully completed, was he wanted to investigate thoroughly how to establish a modern state in compliance with halacha. Now this is not kfiyat datit. That was not anything he was interested in at all. But rather, here's the idea. A modern state has many, many functions. You have to have police, fire department, you need an army, you need security systems, you need utilities, electricity, water. And Rav Herzog said, there must be a way to have the institutions that a society needs in compliance with halacha. So instead of burying your head in the sand and saying, oh, let the Chilonim or the Arabs take care of it, he was saying, how would God want a Jewish state to be constituted? And as a result, he assembled many, many chachamim to try to work in this. Now, their work is very incomplete, and in any event, it's dated because it goes back to the early 1950s, and technology has, of course, grown exponentially. But one outstanding example is a book by the late Rabbi Eliezer Goldenberg, which had not been in print for 50 years for various reasons, called Hilchos Medina. Hilchos Medina, which was designed to create a programmatic way in which a modern state could function within the confines of halacha. Very, very interesting project, and it's one that I have to say, not too many people are engaged in, because again, those who are religious, Orthodox, they just tend to say, let the Chilonim do whatever they're doing, and we'll benefit from what they're doing. But obviously, the Torah envisioned a way that these things could be done. Okay, so why am I mentioning this, besides the fact that it's interesting and it's relevant to the Parsha? Because I also think it's relevant to our guest of honor, Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe was a person who devoted his life in many, many ways. He went to medical school, he had a practice as a physician for many, many years. He was a man, his whole family was a man who very much lived in the world. He did not adopt a religious life, so to speak, that rejected the culture and the science of the world. He fully embraced it. But within that embrace of Derech Eretz, Torah was always the yikar. Torah in Derech Eretz does not mean they're equal. Rather, it means every activity of life must be defined by the Torah. So here we have someone that's a true inspiration. Right? I can look at people who do nothing else but learn, and I can admire them as I do admire them. But I can say, maybe it's not a message for me. I can't live that life. I got to support my family. But when we look at a Baal Habayis who devotes so much of his energies to Torah, to learning Torah, to teaching Torah, to writing about Torah, I think all of us are in a little bit of a trouble here because we lose our excuses at this point. At that point, we can no longer say, well, the guy that only does learning, okay, that's what he does. I'm not that. Okay, you're not that. But Hashem might ask us, could you have been Dr. Kuhr? Could you have done what he did? So in a sense, Rav Moshe is a big inspiration, a big chizuk, and a big responsibility for all of us to understand that even if we are fully engaged in this world, and even if we're involved in professional activity, we still learn Torah, we teach Torah, we share whatever knowledge we have. We understand that Avodas Hashem is the purpose of our lives, and that Avodah encompasses both our so-called religious activities and even our secular activities, because in reality there are no secular activities. In reality, they too are Avodas Hashem. So that was the thought I wanted to share in honor of the Mechaber, and again, I know that Rav Moshe has struggled with many, many issues, with health issues and the like. Hashem should give him great health. And again, as I mentioned before, I also have to acknowledge Phyllis as a true, absolutely wonderful Ezer Connecto that has given him chizuk every bit of the way through the whole journey. I only know you for around 15 years, but I'm sure there were many years before that in which all of that support was always there, and I think all of us get so much pleasure from your ebullient, vivacious, friendly, and warm nature. And once again, may you always have that type of enthusiasm for life and the love and support that you bring to your marriage. The book, the Sefer, well, I should tell you, go and buy it and read it and learn from it. This is not, of course, the first sefer that Rav Moshe has written on the Maharal, but in a sense, it's kind of a culmination. The other books were, direct translations with some commentary of the Gur Aryeh and some of the things in the Nesivos Olam, different chapters. This is more of a selection of insights from a number of the books. And Maharal is a fascinating figure in Jewish history. Maharal lived in the 1500s and the 16th century. If any of you have been in Prague, perhaps you may have gone to the Maharal show. It's interesting that if you ask the average person, what's the one thing you know about the Maharal, everybody will say the golem. Oh, the Maharal made this artificial golem, kind of an AI robot who kind of defended the Jews and beat everybody up, and then was decommissioned and is in the attic of the synagogue. That's the one thing everybody knows. Now, sometimes it happens to be the case that the one thing everybody knows may not always be true. I'll give you another example, not relative. Everybody knows that a Jew with a tattoo cannot be buried in a cemetery. Everybody knows that. You can have a person who knows nothing about Judaism, but they know that. That happens to be not true. So I don't even know how it started. But rest assured, if someone, God forbid, had a tattoo, they could still be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Well, same thing with the golem. Everybody knows Maharal made the golem. Well, I can't say for sure it's not true, but there's a lot of evidence that it is not true. The story of the golem didn't even surface until more than 300 years after the Maharal's Patira by somebody claiming to have found an old document, and that person unfortunately had a reputation as a forger. He happened to be around in the Talmud Chacham. That's an interesting psychological story in and of itself. I don't want to mention the name, I don't want to go into it. But many say the golem story is not true. I don't know. What I would say is this. Even if Maharal didn't make the golem, he could have if he wanted to. Because I believe he was of the Madrega to be able to do it. But Maharal is mysterious. Besides the idea of the issue of the golem, we don't know who the Maharal's Rebbes were. We don't know what yeshiva he learned. He seems to have almost come out of nowhere. Although his brothers were also very learned Talmidei Chachamim. But the Maharal is what we would call in English an autodidact. He's almost like a self-educated person. And the Maharal was Rav of Prague 3 different times. There were times he was fired, times he was removed from his position, because he was extremely outspoken. If he saw social injustice, if he saw rich people abusing their positions, if he saw poor people who were not treated with respect, he spoke about it in his drushes. And then, as is now, if the rabbi infuriated the wealthier members of the congregation, his parnasa was in jeopardy. And the Maharal was a very courageous person in that way. We don't always, we know him from his writings, but in personal life, he was extremely courageous in addressing all sorts of social ills that he perceived in Prague. And they got him back 3 times, meaning even though they fired him, eventually they saw that he was such a great person that eventually he came back. But the Maharal, in particular, was number one. He was a great posek, and his psakim are brought lahalacha. And somebody once asked Rav Ovadia Yosef, and only Rav Ovadia could really give an answer. He says, "What's the Maharal's status as a posek?" So Rav Ovadia immediately calculated every single makor in poskim where Maharal is brought, and he said Maharal bats 1,000. Like every psak that is brought down in poskim, as a shita, we poskim like Maharal. So he was a very, very great posek in halacha. Interestingly, I'll just mention one halachic insight that he had. It's not really a psak. Maharal was against the Shulchan Aruch, even the Beis Yosef. He was against it. He lived at the time when the Shulchan Aruch was written, was issued, because the Maharal actually felt the halachic process needed to be a dynamic process. It needed to focus on local communities, developing halacha by going through the Gemara and going through the Rishonim, and different Rabbanim would come with different views, and there needed to be a flexibility in the system based on grappling with the primary sources, and to have a book that kind of just closed it and said, this is the rule, Maharal says was a subversion of the halachic process. He was not unique in that way. Maharal was actually against the idea of a Shulchan Aruch. That's why if you look at the Yam Shel Shlomo, you will see that the way the Maharal paskins is always by discussing primary sources. Others also had a certain opposition. The Maharsha even writes that, the Gemara says those who paskin from the Mishnah are those who destroy the world, and the Maharsha says, Bisman Hazeh, those who go to the Shulchan Aruch without going through the Gemara and the like, are like Mora Halacha B'toch Mishnah, Mavale Olam. Okay, so that's one interesting point of halacha, that the Maharal felt there needs to be a decentralization of halacha based on independence of judgments and not foreclosing debate by giving you definitive rules. But although the Maharal was a posek, and the Maharal was very great in halacha, his primary contribution is Agadata. Almost every single thing the Maharal wrote is essentially explicating Agadic concepts. And even his very first sefer, the Gur Aryeh is a bit of a, it combines many things. It's a commentary on Rashi. So he goes into the technicalities of the biblical text, grammatical issues, chronological issues. But ultimately, even then, the Maharal's first love is explicating the philosophical foundations of the world of Agada. And it's been well said, Rabbi Chaim Eisen, who was a very beloved teacher here in the OU Center for many, many years, wrote a mammoth article called The Maharal's Revolution in Agada. And I think the article is in Chakira, the famous Flatbush Journal, so it's online, you can get the article for free. It's great, great scholarship. And he kind of demonstrates that the great contribution of Maharal was unlocking the symbolic messages of Agada. And let me explain this. The question here goes back really to the Rambam, if not earlier. And that is, we read Midrashim, we read Gemaras, Agadatas, and the Agadatas seem to be very far-fetched. Some of them seem to be tall tales. Moshe Rabbeinu was 10 amos high, which is 20 feet, and he only reached the ankle of Og Melech Habasha. And we're asking her, or Vashti had a tail, different things like that. And the question is, and there are many, many examples, how do we relate to Agadatas that seem to be not rational, seem to contradict experience? So the Rambam says, many people approach it in a binary way. In other words, they debate, it's either true or not true. Meaning, the Rambam writes, the righteous simpletons say, if Chazal said it, it's true. They're righteous, but they're fools. The Rishayim say, it's Babi Maisas, it's superstition, it's made up. The Rambam says, one group are foolish, and the other group are Rishayim. Because in truth, the true understanding of Agadata is, everything in Agadata is 100% true. But it's not necessarily meant to be literal. Meaning Chazal used parable, hyperbole, exaggeration, vivid images of stories to convey very deep and meaningful spiritual truths. The underlying truths are 100% Torah, but the Agada was a medium, a creative medium, to convey those truths. So says the Rambam, and again, even before the Rambam, you go back to Rav Hai Gaon and the like. The issue is not literal truth versus literal falsity. The issue is truth in a symbolic way. In fact, the word myth, maybe I'm walking on thin ice. When we use the word myth in normal conversation, it's usually a negative pejorative word. Oh, it's a myth. In truth, as Joseph Campbell showed, myths are the deepest way that society expresses the fundamental truths of the society. So if I were to say the words, Agada is a myth, your initial reaction might be, what a kofar, get rid of him. Maybe that's your reaction right now. But in a deeper way, myth is actually more true than reality. Reality may be factual, but it may be trivial. What did I have for lunch today? What did I have for breakfast? My nafkamina. Yeah, it's true, but who cares? Mythical truth is the fundamental psychological, philosophical, spiritual ideas of creation that are expressed in a certain medium. This goes back to the Rambam. Basically the Rambam Gemara Sanhedrin says Agadata has to be understood as a type of symbolic language. And as a symbolic language, it expresses things that are much more deeper than whatever the literal meaning is. Rabbi Salanter once gave a mashal for the way Agadata talks. He says, imagine, in his time, in the middle of the 19th century, the Jews in Russia were confined to the Pale of Settlement, just a certain area. And the Pale of Settlement constantly changed at the caprice of the Tsar. So you would be given notice one morning that says, you got to move 100 miles to the east, and you have 48 hours to do it. Whole population. So Salanter says, imagine you had a journalist who was a creative writer. And the creative writer writes a headline for a newspaper that says, with a drop of ink, 100,000 people were drowned. And you found that newspaper headline 200 years later that says, a drop of ink from a pen drowned 200 people. You would say, what type of bubba mice here? We talk about giants and midgets and ink and drowning. What does it mean? But if you knew the background, you would see how vivid and powerful that statement is. The signing of a decree ruined the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. That's Agadata. So, the Rambam gave us this idea that Agadata is symbolic language. And he made a promise that he was not able to keep. He said he would write a sefer showing the symbolic meaning of Agadata. He gave one example, but he never. This is a sefer, unfortunately, that we don't have. So the Rambam tells us Agadata is symbolic. The Rambam does not tell us what the symbolism is. Maharal opened the door. Maharal cracks the puzzle. Maharal offers the symbolic understanding of the Mishalim and the parables of Chazal. He does this, of course, directly in the Chidushei Agada, where he goes through the Agados of Shas, except for Maseches Brachos for some crazy reason, but he starts from Maseches Shabbos. And he does it indirectly in every one of his Svarim. Every single sefer of the Maharal is essentially devoted to explication of the code of Agadata. And this is so important in life, because as the Vilna Gaon writes, in Agadata are ganuz, are hidden, all of the secrets of human existence, all of the meanings of the Torah, the yayin of the Torah. Halacha is called bread, lechem, and Agada is called the yayin that brings inner simcha and contentment to the soul. Yayin yisamach levav enosh. Harotze lahakir misha amar ve'olam. Chazal say, he who wants to know the God who created the world, Yasok the Agada, should learn the Agada for that understanding. So, this is Maharal's great, great contribution. And by the way, this deals with other things as well. Conflicts between Judaism and between, let's say, the Gemara and science. There are statements in the Gemara that don't fit science. There are probably maybe ideas in the Torah that don't seem to fit scientific understandings. But the Maharal says, instead of positing conflict, by the way, the Maharal was very conversant with the science of the time. Prague at the time was a hotbed of scientific discovery, particularly in the realm of astronomy. Kepler, and indeed there are some legends at least, perhaps they're even true, that the Maharal had interactions with some of those great scientists. He does make reference to, Copernicus was not in Prague, but he makes reference to Copernicus. He makes reference to the discovery of America as a new world. Maharal was not afraid to deal with all of this. But the Maharal points out that statements in the Gemara that contradict science are not necessarily meant to be literal. There are symbolic meanings here. And once you liberate the Agada from an over-reliance on literalness to embrace symbolic meaning, you kind of liberate all of these conflicts that would otherwise exist because it's no longer literal. Unlike, for example, a contemporary that the Maharal lambasted, is also a great person, Maharal, where Maharal Naim says he takes the science of Chazal literally and simply says, well, okay, Chazal were infallible when it comes to Torah, but they got their science wrong, and that's okay. And Maharal really attacked the Maharal Naim in the Sefer Beragola. Maharal says Chazal are dealing with spiritual, symbolic concepts. They are not referring to science. Science is a separate area. I mean, that frees all of the science-religious conflicts that one would have. So, once again, obviously time does not allow us to go through it. You have to go through medrash by medrash, agadata by agadata. But the great, great, great contribution of Maharal that all of the later generations rely upon is to show how rich and deep and vivid Haggadah is by liberating it from the superficiality of literal interpretation. And what Moshe has done in his latest book is to give us some gems of the Maharal, and the hope would be, and I know that's your hope too, that this will whet your hunger, open up, stimulate your interest, and then you'll be able to go back to some degree to the original Makoros and see the full development. So I just want to give you a Yasher Koach. The Zechus of the Maharal is certainly with you, and may it be a tremendous source of bracha and atzlacha in all that you do. Thank you so much.
It is a great schus of one.
Erev Tov, everyone. One of the great rules of public speaking is that you don't speak after children. In the rabbinate, there's another rule that you don't speak on the same subject after Rabbi Brodowitz has spoken. I only wanted to point out, to add one thing to Rabbi Brodowitz's brilliant analysis of Maharal. Rabbi Brodowitz mentioned the Morinayim, Azariah Derasi, Azariah Mino Adomim. We always think that the problems and challenges that we face are somehow new and different and more difficult. We have pity on ourselves. Well, in the time of the Maharal, he is coming after the exile from Spain. The exile from Spain was to the Jewish world in the 15th and 16th centuries the equal of what the Shoah was to our time. The Jews were in Spain 800 years. They were prime ministers and generals, ministers of the treasury. They were wealthy. They had great yeshivot. They produced great Talmidei Chachamim. If you're in a country 800 years, you're going to be there forever, right? Lakewood's forever. But the Golitz teaches us that nothing is forever. So there's that trauma. And then there is an intellectual trauma. Until that time, the church was very, very strong, to the extent that it brooked no dissent. And the church had antiquated ideas, they had wrong ideas about everything. And people who expressed disagreement with the church usually ended up in the fire. But in the century of the Maharal, there arose all sorts of dissidents. And within 100 years, the Protestant movement would occur, the Enlightenment, the Western world would change, and the church would begin its inevitable decline that we see it suffering from today. Someone had to represent the Jewish people. Someone had to say, we are not the church. Because on the surface, a lot of things look alike. Now, Azariah, he was interested in the new culture. And he wanted to fit the Jewish people into the new culture, and therefore it meant reinterpreting Chazal, ignoring things, changing things. And he was a person of great note. We read in this week's Parsha the comparison between Bilam and Moshe. My Rebbe always used to say, if you met Bilam on the street, you would think he's Moshe. He didn't have a sign that says, I'm an Apokeros. He used to say even more strongly, he said, er getroffen a Zupetje and a Streimel. But Maharal saw that as a danger to the Jewish people. Because once you start whittling at Chazal, once that you start saying this is not what they meant, or they were wrong, or that's not really the story, so you end up with all sorts of things. The first change that Reform in Germany made to the prayer service was they eliminated the first Yikum Purka. So we make a Yikum Purka, it's good, it's in Aramaic, so nobody knows what they're saying. So we say it. But it's a blessing for people that don't exist, that haven't existed for 1,000 years. The heads of the yeshiva in Bovel, the great Rabbonim in Bovel. Who, what, where? There isn't a Jew in Iraq today. But they took out the first Yikum Purkan, and it never stopped there. So, the Maharal, in his brilliance, took all of this on, took on the church. In his writings, there are many things about Christianity that he does in a sublime way. He took on Azariah the Rossi head on. He was open to the new world, because he said Torah is eternal, and we not fear the future, because we are the future. And the Jewish people blessed him in legend, therefore. That's how you can tell how the Jewish people like somebody. They make up stories about them. I remember my Rebbe used to say, the Maharal is nitah, but the Gelim is geblieben. The Maharal is not here, but the Golem is still here. Such a legend. Who had such a legend about anybody? And the legend was so real that people were afraid in the Altai synagogue to go under the second floor, because the Golem would get you. was the boogeyman. But that was a sign of love. It was a sign of appreciation that we have such a great person that he can create a human being. And he created many human beings through his books and his writings and his teachings. Chazal said about educators and Talmidei Chachamim, Oseh Maaseh Bereishis. They're creators. And the creativity is the secret of our longevity and our success. Now it has to be said truthfully that for many, many generations, the Maharal was the province of certain Talmidei Chachamim amongst Klal Yisrael. The Chassidim liked him because of the Kabbalah. Scholars liked him because of his philosophy. But the average Jew that did Chumash and Rashi was not really aware of him. But Torah is eternal. And Chazal say, Divrei Torah aniyim b'mokom echad, v'ashirim b'mokom acher. The words of Torah don't seem to apply at a certain time or a certain place, but at a different time and a different place, they are cogent and relevant. And in our time, the Maharal has had, as others have had, a resurrection that would be unimagined 150, 200 years ago. I remember when I was in the yeshiva, so it was pretty much, this is shortly after the American Civil War. You're laughing, I'm telling you the truth. So there was a Jew in New York that printed the Kuhr on the Rashi on the Chumash, the Maharal on Chumash. And I remember that he asked one of the great Rabbonim of the time how many copies he should make of the book. Because when you print the book, it doesn't make that much of a difference if you print 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,000. Once the basic setup is there. So the rabbi said to him, he said, well, probably 500 would be enough now. He said, but there'll come a day that they'll have to reprint and reprint and reprint. And that day has arrived. There are thousands of swarm of the Maharal that are in circulation and are studied. What Dr. Kuhr has done is produce a number of books that make the Maharal accessible to an English-speaking public in an understandable way and in an inspirational way. And in fact, I would say that Kuhr himself is an inspiration. I still owe him money for being the pediatrician for my children. But if you'll ask people today, Moshe Kuhr, they'll tell you, oh yeah, he wrote about the Maharal. There can be no greater compliment. There can be no greater title. And therefore, I'm very happy to have been able to come here tonight and extend my blessings to Moshe and Phyllis. Phyllis is one of the hardest people in the world to say no to. I imagine Murray knows that too. But I'm grateful for her persistence, and I'm grateful to the Kuhrs for the friendship they extended to me and my family over our decades together in Muncie. He should continue to go Machayel El Choyel, have nachas and simcha and good health. And we should always meet l'kavod HaTorah, l'kavod Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael.
Amen.
Thank you all for coming. I've had a tiny dibur for the last 3 days in hope of saving enough voice up that I'll be able to speak tonight. And I might just give up in the middle, but we're giving it a try. Birshut Harav Wein. We've been together for 46 years. Birshut Rav Breidowitz. What you heard tonight is just an example of how one person can have so much in him to give so much to so many. I also want to give kavod to my chavrusas, of whom I see many, many in the audience. When I was 21, a girl told me that she had a deep feeling of Ahavat Hashem. That blew my mind. I had never thought about the idea of Ahavat Hashem. I was dumbfounded. After 4 years in a Haredi yeshiva, and after saying Kriyat Shema 3 times a day, for, let's say, from my bar mitzvah to then, as 8 years, that's a lot of times that I said, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. I never thought about the concept of Ahavat Hashem. We're going to talk about that a little bit. There's 2 ways. There's an Ava that he gives to us, and there's an Ava that we give to him. Ava in general is reciprocal. Yira is not reciprocal. It's unidirectional. I want to follow up what Rav Breidowitz said with a Dvar Torah from last week's Parsha, which is exemplary of a method of the Maharal. The Maharal takes a medrash and he gives you the essence of it, and he sort of writes the medrash on the medrash. In last week's Parsha, there's a famous Rashi about the Parah Adumah. That the king has a maid has a son, and the son makes a mess. And the king said, the one that made the mess, let the mother come and clean it up. Now, the Maharal has 3 separate takes on that. This is Moshe Darshan, and also in the Tanchuma. And this is one that's particularly relevant. What is it that the Parah is doing for the sin? We don't have a relationship between what the Parah Adumah does and sin. We have a relationship of what it has to do with Tumah V'Tara. So the answer to this question is that the child made a mess. The mess was Mavet. They brought Mavet into the world. How does that happen? Adam HaRishon lost his mortality when he did the sin. We don't hear about it again until Bnei Yisrael say, Na'aseh v'nishma. Hashem sends 600,000 angels and ties crowns in the hair, in the head. I hope it's head and not hair, because not everybody has enough hair for this, but for 40, and along with those crowns, returned immortality. The idea that man is going to live and die, get suspended, because we're on a different plane now. We're in a different ballpark. But it only lasted for 40 days. And then, when the Egel is constructed and the Jews sin, Hashem sends 600,000 Malachei Kabbalah down to collect those crowns, and with it return mortality to the Jewish people. Once we had mortality, then we had Tumah V'Tara. Because why? There's a relationship between a dead body and Tumah. That's the Avi Avot HaTumah. And when the king says to the maid, clean up the mess that your child made, that means bring something that's going to reverse the tumah that you brought into the world by creating Mavet. Now that's an example of, everybody knows the Moshe Darshan, the level of the story. The Maharal gives you a different take on it that has a very deep lesson. The Maharal, I've been interested in Briat HaOlam for my adult life. When I was 17, I left the yeshiva and I went to the university. Because I wasn't, at that time, I felt as though I wasn't getting the answers I wanted from the Volozhiner agenda. And I have to say that I got a lot out of my experience in university. And the thing that attracted me the most was biology. Because in biology, you can see the hand of Hashem constantly. The way he does it, it's not enough to say that he created it, but he's giving you, there's a way to understand how it comes about, that we have the functions of people. And not only that, Maharal's idea is that there's Seder in the world, and Hashem creates Seder by extending his Or Ein Sof all the way through creation. What does it mean? It means when the earth spins, he's spinning it. And when the electrons spin, he's spinning them. He has a personal take, a personal responsibility for everything that goes on in his world, with one exception. Of course, that one exception is when he created man, he gave him B'chirat Chofshi. Hameir La'aretz L'Adoim Olah Barachamim, he who illuminates the world and all of those that live there with mercy. Uvetuvo Mechadesh B'chol Yom Talmid Maseh Bereshit. It's not just that he created it once, he is constantly creating Maseh Bereshit. He is constantly supervising all of those electrons, and all of those atoms, and all of those molecules, and all those rocks. That's the domain sphere. Then you have the Tzomeach sphere, where you have growing things, but they can't move. And he is responsible for the photosynthesis. He's responsible for the production of food for higher forms. He has a hand in every moment of existence. So then we come to Chai. Chai are those animals that move. They also have a brain of sorts, and they are programmed to do Ritzon Hashem. the lion does what he's programmed to do. And you can say the same about virtually all of creation. And then above this level of Chai, you have Medaber. Medaber is us. And we're different from everything else in creation. Because why? Because we are the ones with Bechira. We have a choice to choose between good and bad. So you might, Yeshayahu says, Yotzer or v'orei choshech, oseh shalom v'orei ra. So we have that Hashem actually creates Ra. Now how does that jive with Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva says, Kol David Rachman Latav Avid. Everything that Hashem does is good. What's his business that Yeshaya is telling us that he created Ra? Well, there's a reason, but only he knows the reason, because it's certainly added a dimension of sorrow to the life of each and every one of us. What is it all about? He wants it for our benefit to be able to choose the right thing and be rewarded with it in Olam Haba. That's a kind of a Ramchalian view of why there's Ra in the world. I have a son, Idan. We named him Menachem, but over the course of years, he chose another name for himself for some reasons that he had. And we used to play tennis together in Central Park. And one day he says to me, I have a pain in my chest. I have a heavy feeling. I don't know what it is. I said, you've got to go to a cardiologist. He went to the cardiologist and he got an angiogram, and the angiogram showed that he had total occlusion of his left main carotid artery, which is called the widowmaker. And we were told that he needed an immediate procedure, a triple bypass, to get him out of this threatening situation. He never recovered from the operation. He had continuous pain ever since for the last 20 years. That's a hard thing. And you want to do what you can for him, but there's nothing to do. So he went went back to the surgeon and said, maybe there's a stitch or something that's causing my pain. He was opened up again, nothing happened. He tried medicines, nothing helped. He had bad reactions to the serious pain medications. He went to the pain therapist. Nothing was helping, and he decided as a last resort to go to Rochester, Minnesota, to their department of, but he didn't go to pain management. He went to pain rehab. Now that's a different kind of a thing. Those folks are very, very tough. And they deal with those patients that are not responding to anything. And the advice that they give is don't try to do anything about it, because it's just going to cause you more trouble. Stop all your medicines, which he did. You can do some exercise, you can take some nutrition, but that's all. Don't expect anybody to do anything about your pain. You've got to learn to live with it. That's a very, very tough proposition. It's like an EO situation. It's an extreme of of the Ra that Hashem made when he created the world. The Ra from our point of view. I was learning with him at that time. And we finished Tanya, 53 chapters. And I said, let's see what the Maharal has got to say about your situation, about chronic pain, about pain that doesn't resolve. So he says, what's the point of all this? Why am I, I don't see any good in it. Rabbi Akiva says everything is for the good. I don't see the good. So we learned. Rav Huna says, in the beginning of the first chapter of Nativ HaYisurim, he says, Yipashpesh ma'asecha v'yaseh tshuva shenemar nachpesha darkenu v'nachakora v'shuvu al Hashem. That's a pasuk in Eicha. So it's giving an eitzah about what to do with a person who is suffering the kind of suffering that the Eicha talks about. So Idan says, I tried that. I examined everything that I do. I try, I've done things in the past. I've made tshuva for it. It's not helping. So Rav Huna says to Idan, you should try to learn more Torah. Ashrei HaGever asher tiasrenu lo yah u'mitoratecha talamdenu. Fortunate is the person who Hashem causes suffering to, and he should learn from our Torah. So, we all know Torah Tavlin, you feel a little better. Chosh Barosha Yasser Patorah, he tried it. It didn't work. So he says, in the words of Lo Matzah, according to Rav Huna, then you go to the next step. And the next step is Biyadua Shahayisurim Boim Mi'avat Hashem. New idea. Pain is love of God. There's a point to the pain. Eov got forgiven when as the Maharal goes on to discuss, when he was able to accept his pain as love. It's a hard thing. It's a hard prescription. The students of Rabbi Yochanan asked Rabbi Yochanan, you're in great pain. Do you appreciate it? And he said, not it, and not its reward. In other words, he knew what Hashem expected of him, but he couldn't do it. Interesting idea. It caught on with my son. So Idan says, I still have the pain, but now I have the reason for the pain. So it isn't just a blank. It isn't just a total loss. People like me, he says, could benefit from knowing this. Just like I didn't know about Ahavat Hashem when I was 21, and it took me 40 years before I got any kind of handle on that question. the people that people that are suffering like me, they don't know what to do. So we wrote a book. We wrote a translation of Nativ HaYisurim. Now Maharal sees creation as order and disorder and tikkun. In other words, he's holding everything together every moment. This piece of paper is receiving Or Ein Sof at a certain level. And each and every one of us are also being managed that way, except we have the ability to choose between good and bad. Now, I have, when I left yeshiva when I was 17, I was seeking a kind of knowledge that was going to satisfy my urge to know about Hashem's creation. And Bezrat Hashem, I found it. I love biology. Biology tells us how Hashem does what he does. And then I got interested in human body. That's just the next natural step. I went to medical school. And going to medical school, I was able to learn about anatomy, physiology, everything that Hashem makes, and also that's how he orders the human being. But then you have the question of the disorder. The disorder are all those diseases that we talk about. I've been privileged to appreciate Masa Bereshis through the study of biology, then medicine, and then I've been privileged to practice 45 years pediatrics. And it's almost every day I would learn something else about the way Hashem created the world. Now, let's talk about diseases. Let's talk about diseases with which I have a familiarity because I have been affected by these diseases. And I've been able to see Hashem's hand in the disorder and to be privileged to be healed. Hashem is the Rofei Ne'eman. He's the guy that makes everything come back together. So let's take a few examples. He creates an immune system, and that immune system protects the person from external invasion of germs or whatever. And this immune system is subject to disorder. So I had a case in myself where my immune system attacked my platelets. So I got something called ITP. ITP turned out to be a battle between my spleen and my bone marrow. And Bezrat Hashem, Hashem gave the wisdom to my doctors and the pharmaceutical companies that there's a medicine that I can take to keep it under control. That's Hashem acting on both ends, disorder and tikkun. I have pulmonary fibrosis. That's another one of these immune diseases where something got switched, and instead of protecting me, it's causing scarring in my lungs. We don't know yet what the answer to that one is. Baruch Hashem, it hasn't bothered me too much. What's going on with cancer? I'm not going to go through any details, but what was happening was that Hashem dictates and controls and supervises every single cell that replicates in the human body. He's got a hand in the whole thing. And think for a moment how he is, with his Ein Sof, maintaining the reproduction of all the cells of the body. Now, I never gave that any thought until I got my cancer. Some of you know that in Tashpa, Erev Yom Kippurim, I had a fall in the mikveh. On my way into the mikveh, and it was an incredible experience. I had a pain that shot through me that was so intense, so much more intense than anything I had ever imagined. And for a split second, I rode that pain all the way up, maybe to the Kisei HaKavod. In other words, I felt at that moment that he was doing something for me. It was his love for me that was causing that extreme pain that I had. It didn't last. It was only for a split second. The Rosham of it continued on for a long time. So there is some point to pain, and when there doesn't seem to be any point at all, you know that's Hashem talking to me. When I walk home from shul in the morning, that hip gives me a twinge, and then I say, "Good morning, Kadosh Baruch Hu. You're with me. Thank God you're not making it worse than it is, but I'm very happy to have you along with me." A word about the book. I've been studying Maharal, going back. Actually, my chavrusa that got me started in it is here in the audience. Yehuda Eliezri. We had a Seder at his house, and I said, "I'm not happy with how well I know Rashi. I want to know a Perush on Rashi." He says, "Well, what you want is the Gur Aryeh." I said, "Who is the Gur Aryeh?" And he said, "It's the Maharal Miprag." So that's how we started. And I felt very comfortable with it. To use a word that I've seen writers use, there's a felicity involved. I could barely get the point of it, and a lot of it I couldn't get, but what I got was very pleasing to me, and I was ready for it. And that's how I got started translating the Gur Aryeh, and the rest is history. It's available to you on the back, and any of you that have copies of not all three, but one of the three, you could fill your ones that you don't have by purchasing some in the back. So Idan and me, we wrote this book, and we love it. The Mosaic Press did a very nice job with it, and I encourage you to partake of it. I thank you all for coming tonight. It's a big zchut for me. It's a big kavod for me that I don't deserve. But I'm very happy that you're all here, and that I was able to get some of these ideas off my chest. I'm 83. Nobody cares what I say anymore. So I want to say that we should have only good things for all of us. I didn't mention one other thing about illnesses. Some of you know that my grandson had a stroke in Panama the 6th day of Pesach. And it was a massive, massive thing, and he's been recovering ever since. Baruch Hashem, this week, his handwriting became legible. Okay? Not last week, not the week before, but this week. And the first steps that he took, all of these things is Hashem mending together the disorder that happened on account of his inflammatory disease of his cerebral vessel. And we are very thankful, day by day, that he is continuing to mend those axons and dendrites and putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. And we are so thankful to Hashem for that. And I thank you all for coming tonight.
Folks, I just want to thank Dr. Kuhr and to Phyllis as well for hosting this beautiful evening of inspiration for all of us. There will be further book sales for the next few moments in the back of the room. I believe Dr. Kuhr will be available to sign the book for those that want to. In 5 minutes, any man that would like to join us for Maharal that has not done Maharal, we'll done Maharal on this side of the room in 5 minutes. Not by hour. Beautiful, beautiful.